to a little over a week to review everything that we're doing.
Okay.
So she also takes the minutes, and I know, Ken, you think they're very detailed, and Bart's been doing them. I asked her if she wanted to join so she could get used to understanding a little more about the chit chat when it is streaming. I mean, when it is recorded. So there may be a time she doesn't join us, but she still will be doing the minutes and sending out the agendas.
Okay.
So welcome, Barb. Very much needed. Say something, Barb. Say hi.
Thank you.
Hi, Barb. No, we're thanking you, Barb.
Hello. Carry on.
Okay. Thanks, Barb.
All right. And I managed to get us recording and streaming, so we can go ahead and call this meeting to order at 6:58. So roll call.
Barb, do you want me to still do the roll call, or I can do it. Miss Williamson?
Here.
Mr. Mauger?
I'm here.
Miss McCreary?
Yes, present.
Mr. Hookrattle?
Here.
Mayor and myself.
All right. And I thought we would have a visitor, but I don't see him on yet. So we will go ahead and do the approval of the minutes from the November 12th, 2020 meeting.
I read them and they correctly registered everything that I said. Mr. Hookrattle, however, said more than I did, so he would be the one to know whether everything was correct.
I say when I looked through them, they looked fairly accurate in summarizing the discussion we had.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And
Of course, I'm going
from
to
what I
abstain.
remember,
I've read them, but
I
I wasn't present.
agreed.
Okay.
I come into the meeting late, but however, I wasn't that late, so I think they're okay.
Okay. Well, there were just a lot of comments attributed to you, and I just wanted you to make sure that they were really yours.
Okay. Yeah.
Yep.
Yes.
So is that a motion, Mr. Hookrattle, to accept the minutes as printed?
Yeah, I will do that.
All
And I
right.
will
Ms.
second
Harris.
that.
All right. Any further discussion on the minutes? None. Roll call.
Miss Williamson?
Yes.
Mr. Mauger?
Yes.
Mr. Hookrattle?
Yes.
And Miss McCreary?
I'm going to abstain. I wasn't present.
All right.
Perfect. Thank you.
And I vote yes.
Oh, Mayor.
So, all right, then we will move on to visitors. And I see Rick is joining. Rick, you got anything for visitors right now?
Nope, I'm good.
All right. Then we will move forward with the old business. First item is the short-term rentals, Airbnb, bed and breakfast discussion. Just as a recap, I know Brandy's been doing some catch up on it. But what we've done over now the past year is we had a meeting with all owners, well, a couple of owners that we knew of that participated to learn about how short-term rentals worked, how Airbnb worked. We heard from one owner that has an entire building that is available on Airbnb. And then we heard from another owner that is a resident occupied type structure where they rent out a room or a smaller portion of their home. So we got some differences there. We heard at one meeting from residents and business neighbors, gave them an opportunity to provide input. Several didn't even know that they existed in the local area, but at least one neighbor came in and talked about what works out to be a short-term rental, but is not one that is advertised on the Airbnb, VRBO type sites, but is more of a word-of-mouth short-term rental. And then at the last meeting, we had a review of what some other municipalities are doing with short-term rentals. We spent a lot of time on a Dublin study because they did a very in-depth analysis of pros and cons and what works, what doesn't. Interestingly enough, I hope everybody got a copy of it afterwards. After the Dublin study, they instituted some policies, but didn't really have any regulations or any ordinances to enforce them. But after that meeting, we found out that they actually had just passed an ordinance with an enforcement mechanism behind some of the short-term rental policies. And I know Terry sent that out, would have been just before, so probably the first or second week of December with some information on that. So that left us with tonight's discussion to be about, synthesizing all of that data and trying to figure out if we need to do something, and if so, what. I know when I was reviewing it over the weekend and again this morning, I came up with a series of questions. I emailed them out to everybody this morning. Hopefully you got them and had a chance. I just wanted to share them with everybody because it's kind of, to me, kind of will help guide the discussion a little bit. With the very first question being, based on the information we have, do we think we need to do anything about short-term rentals? And by do anything, I mean, do we need to do anything from modifying a definition to full-fledged zoning change, anywhere in that range? Do we need to do anything, or are we satisfied with what we have and don't want to do any further action at this time? As I said, if the answer to this question is no, then our discussion the rest of the evening is fairly quick. If it's yes, then we have further discussion to have. So I guess who wants to start? Do we think we need to do something, or are we happy with where we're at?
Well, Mr. Mayor, I guess my concern is I feel like I represent the people of the village, not just my own personal opinion. And I don't know that anyone other than we solicited is aware that we're working on this. I've not seen any communication publicly that this is something that planning and zoning is contemplating and offering the general public, whether they live next to someone or whether they own one. Those are the only populations that we've really solicited information or opinions from.
We have, so the way it works out is, so we kind of had these as kind of like, think of them almost like functioning congressional hearings where we invite the people in that we know exist to talk about it. So if the committee decides we want to do something and we're to do something, a zoning code change requires not only a public hearing in planning and zoning. So if we were to decide to do something and come up with a plan and an idea that we wanted to take to council, we first have to have a public hearing in planning and zoning on it. And then the committee would have to vote to send their recommendations to council. When it goes to council, they have to have legislation for it, so it stays on for 3 readings, but council also has to have a public hearing on a zoning code change. So if the committee decides to do something, there are, by law, 2 public hearings, as well as 3 readings in council. So that would be a total of 5 opportunities for the public to weigh in addition to the planning and zoning meetings, we've had. So it is something that at that point, if something is decided to be done tonight, it doesn't preclude future input from residents. Does that make sense?
Yes, I guess I was just thinking that we could get their input to know whether or not they felt something was needed. And we're in kind of a cloistered time, so it's not like I can go talk to my neighbors.
Well, I agree that it is, times where we can't quite just go out and talk to people next door. The other thing I would say is while I would love for more people to be more involved, maybe I'm a little jaded because of the water issue and council, but everybody seems to want to complain about it. And I tell people to come to council, and no one ever comes to council. No one ever calls me. No one ever emails me about it. They complain about it online, but they don't show up. So I don't know that if we were to solicit and say, hey, we're doing this in planning and zoning, what are your thoughts, that we would necessarily get anything meaningful.
Can I ask a question here?
Yeah.
Do we want to disallow this in any particular, like an R1, R2, R3? Or I guess my thought is if we're not going to disallow it in any of those areas, it wouldn't have to be a zoning code change. You know,
Well,
it's already a permissible use. That's the wrong term here, I'm sorry. So I don't see where we need to actually change zoning code, but I think we need to decide if we want to register, license, do nothing, or what.
Well,
that's
and those, yeah, and those are some of my questions I had too. Do we think we need to do something? And so if it's not a zoning code change, this committee can still make the recommendation to council to pass an ordinance to, to do a registration or a licensing or make that recommendation. So even if, like I said, the first question is do we do something? The next question becomes what? And some of those questions become, do we limit it to certain areas, or do we make it, do we limit it to certain zoning areas? For instance, adult entertainment establishments are only permitted in limited manufacturing areas. Do we do something like that? Or like you said, Ken, do we just say it's a permitted use in all zoning districts? In which case the question becomes, is it something this committee thinks we should put in the zoning code, or is it something this committee thinks that council should just do an enforcement ordinance on?
Okay, can I add something to what you just said?
You can, Jim.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, please do, because I in the last meeting, one of your questions was, can we just change the definition of bed and breakfast to include operations like this and get somewhere? So, but
if we implement a short-term rental ordinance, that takes in hotels, motels, all that. You don't want that in R1, R2, and R3. So I think we would have to do some limiting as to where you would put hotels, motels, and they're in that. So that we got to think about that, how far that short-term rental would go. So I would think that somebody coming in to develop certainly wouldn't want to be harnessed with R1, R2, that they could put a hotel right in there. I don't know. That's my thinking on short term, because it covers a lot in reality, not just that residence there that somebody's renting a room or two out.
So what I'm hearing, Jim, is that no matter, even if the committee decides they don't want to do some sort of something within the zoning code new section, we need to at least make the definition to differentiate between a short-term rental that is an Airbnb room for rent type place versus a hotel motel, so that we can differentiate the two, so that we need at least a definition change.
Yes.
Okay.
We will need something there. Now, if we go with just staying with what we have with a bed and breakfast, it says, when it outlines that first paragraph as to what a bed and breakfast is, it says breakfast may be served, but can be the only meal served. Am I right, Terry?
I think as I'm looking at the definition,
That is correct. It says may
Yes.
be
So
served. So that
therefore-
is correct. Sorry, it was on mute.
Okay. So therefore, where the concern was with a railroad street property, that they don't serve breakfast, therefore they're not a bed and breakfast, they fit our description. And we're the ones that tell them where they fit in to our zoning act.
all right, but what about then the property and for lack of a better term at the moment, I'll call it the commercial Airbnb, where it's an entire building available for rent. Do we think that would fall within our existing bed and breakfast definition, or is it something where we maybe just need to change the bed and breakfast definition to a call it short-term rentals and expand it a little bit?
Mayor, if I may
Well,
ask, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. Ms. Terry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. This is Brandy McCreary. I know I'm new to this committee, but I went through the notes and there was one question that I came up with that Mr. Mauger also had, and I wasn't there to hear any of the additional details. But I guess my big question is, what is the goal? What are you looking to do? I hear
So
what you're looking. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So how this started is the owners of the one on Railroad Street contacted the village and wanted to know about, what regulations we have, because they wanted to make sure they complied with any regulations for Airbnb. And we weren't real sure if it truly fit in with a bed and breakfast. And then we had the other property that's an entire building that's available for Airbnb. And then we started to discover a home that is for rent weekly or monthly, but it's not advertised online. And there are some code violations there and some concerns with some of the people that rent it. So I thought it best to have a series of meetings to discuss, is this emerging short-term rental business something we need to look at and get some regulations or procedures in place before it becomes a problem? Because it's easier to, while we might not be able to encompass everything, if one existed and became a problem, it can sometimes be harder to put stuff into effect then than it is now, so that when they do come in and start to operate like those owners wanted, they know what they have to do and comply with.
Okay.
So that's very much why my first question is, do we need to do anything at this time? And do we want to do anything at this time?
All right, thank you. I didn't mean to interrupt, Mr. Hookrattle. I'm just I'm listening to you, and I'm trying to put pieces together to figure out what the goal is, like what you're looking
And
to
can
do.
I just add
Thank you.
one
That
thing?
helps.
I'm sorry. Can I just add one thing to what was said? Already in our zoning, we have where bed and breakfasts are conditional uses in several of the districts. The issue falls back to the definition thing. Is a bed and breakfast is defined as what? And that's where some of the issues come in, because as a conditional use, if someone wanted to put one in reality, they need to come and ask permission to do it. But if they say, I'm a short-term rental, not a bed and breakfast, we have nothing that covers that. So a little bit of, again, back to that definition.
Well, I agree with Jim that maybe we need to just adjust our description. I mean, I'm looking at the the hotel description, and it's really pretty vague. It says a building in which temporary lodging or board and lodging are provided and offered to the public for compensation, in which ingress and egress to and from all rooms is made through an inside lobby. That's about as vague as you're going to get. The bed and breakfast at least narrows it down to a residential use consisting of one dwelling unit with no more than 8 rooms or suites that are rented to the public for overnight or weekday accommodations. I think we need to maybe tighten our descriptions, but I really don't see where we need to do much. We want to totally amend or change the zoning code for this. I can see where registration is good, but I don't think that's a zoning issue.
Okay.
Okay.
So that gets us to definitions. And I was looking up as you were reading that, Ken, I was like, oh, and, you know, where you say maybe we need to tighten these up. When you were reading hotel, and it said ingress and egress for all rooms made through an inside lobby. And I went to motel because then I was thinking of the infamous Lancaster Motel down there on their South Columbus Street. You know, and you know, I'm wondering if, you know, the motel definition is what I'm trying to get at, could be tightened up a little bit too, because all of those rooms are accessed from the outside. There is no central lobby for ingress and egress. Mm-hmm. So that maybe we need to tighten that up. And then I guess the question would come then is an entire residential structure made available for rent on a short-term basis, and short-term is probably something we need to define as well. But, you know, do we create a new definition for that, or are we going to modify bed and breakfast to short-term rentals and just define it within there?
Is Rick still on with us here?
Rick?
Yeah, I agree. I'd like to have Rick's opinion.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, Rick, let me ask you this. The B&B or the Airbnb, I can see where some people will say, well, that doesn't apply to me because I'm not a bed and breakfast. But it's just semantics. I mean, isn't it? Or am I being led down the wrong path?
Now, as far as I'm concerned, it's semantics, yes.
I'm in agreement with that. I don't mean to intercede, but I'm thinking bed and breakfast. If you're thinking about that particular type of, let's call it bed and breakfast or short-term rental, technically, because each of those rooms is only accessible from within the building. Am I not correct? Plus,
On Railroad, I'm not sure. I think it was a mother-in-law suite. It may have an exterior access. I'm not sure.
okay. But
So
I
don't
guess,
want to preclude that. Many of them have like a mother-in-law suite or a detached living space over a garage or something like that. So many of them are on the same piece of property, but may have their own entrance.
okay.
But they're usually one unit, not multiple units like a motel.
And I think we are in the position, like all of the paperwork that I sent you out from Dublin and stuff, they also just did not define bed and breakfast because, to Rick's point, it's probably just, you know, what a person thinks a bed and breakfast is. And then they just put everything, all of those clumped together as short-term rentals.
As I say, would it make sense to retitle our bed and breakfast definition as short-term rental and just call it a residential use consisting of one dwelling with no more than 8 rooms for suites rented for public overnight weekly accommodations for a fee. Take out the entire line about serving breakfast. And then in the definition, just put, in EG, bed and breakfast, Airbnbs, VRBO rooms and stuff like that. And then that way it encompasses all of those types of short-term rentals.
That's basically the direction that I see us going.
My only concern is, Rick, you're already holding a property that is considered and accepted as bed and breakfast. Do you object to us changing that title to your property's use?
I never intended to be a bed and breakfast.
Okay.
I cook breakfast, but I don't cook it for other people other than Robin. So I'm not sure how you would want to change that, but yeah, everyone knows this was an Airbnb or a bed and breakfast before. And part of what we ran into here is that we used to have the Market Street overlay, and I supported removing that because I never imagined that I would be dumped back into my R3, zoning, because on Market Street, it just, to me, doesn't make sense. But that's a whole nother topic. But no, it was operated as an Airbnb where they did serve breakfast, and I bought it after that, and I never imagined that this would become such an issue. But we're never going to do a breakfast thing there, and I don't know why we would want to make a differentiation between people who did and people who didn't, because the Nancy Crow people, I don't know whether they serve breakfast to their people or not, because there are a couple of those in town that have yet to be revealed, and they haven't been brought into this conversation. Do they offer breakfast? I don't know, but they do exist.
If I may,
Mm-hmm.
I think it is a matter of semantics, because in these days, synonymously, we are using interchangeably often bed and breakfast with Airbnb. Now, a breakfast, maybe you have to define breakfast. Can it be a coffee machine and a pastry?
Isn't the B&B and Airbnb air bed and breakfast? Isn't that what it originally started out as?
Yeah.
But none of them serve breakfast, so I don't.
It's usually
Some
a
do,
combination
some
of,
don't. I don't know. We just don't know that.
But to Brandy's point, we use them interchangeably. It's a
Yeah.
bed and breakfast. Everybody knows that that's just a nightly rental, whether you get breakfast or not.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, but you got to be careful with that. Everybody knows.
but that would be the definition, like Mayor suggested, is amending that a bit and including some of that specific verbiage. But I think honestly, like the breakfast part seriously can be as much as, because I've stayed at some of these, a coffee maker. and whether it's
the definition of breakfast is pretty broad.
I'm serious. Cereal bars that are prepackaged. Yeah. I mean, I'm just saying that if that's what they're looking for, that's kind of what you get at some of these places.
Right. And the one that I've stayed at was literally nothing provided except the kitchenette with a stove for you to cook your own breakfast.
No.
Because it was literally like in a little.
Something here?
Yeah, please.
What we're discussing now, whether the place serve or what they serve and what they don't serve, I think is outside of our zoning. We're looking at, they're going to sleep there, and we say breakfast may be served because maybe the next people that start one is going to serve breakfast. It may be. If we add shall serve breakfast, then we got a problem because we got two that don't cook. But we say may. So that makes it optional.
Mhm.
It does, or like I said, maybe we could just remove that entire line about breakfast.
I don't think it even matters anymore.
Yeah, Yeah.
Can you mean that line about breakfast?
Yes, I mean, it's a moot point. I mean,
Yeah.
bed and breakfast started out, the way I see it is, someone renting a room, they offered you breakfast, then you'd be on your way. But everything has evolved to where it's not even a point anymore.
Yes, I agree.
I liked from the Dublin document, and I know they've moved beyond this, instead of worrying about registration and zoning regulations, their number one thing was adopt a policy that outlines the cities, ours would be villages' expectations for the manner that short-term rentals will be operated. They circulate that to the short-term rentals. If complaints are received, then they move forward and make other changes.
And that seems to be short and to the point. It's addressing the short-term rentals.
Mhm.
all right. So,
Now, with that policy, then we would formulate it, it would have to be approved by council, correct?
yeah, I mean, you could recommend, council adopt this policy for short-term rentals. I don't think that doesn't go through a zoning code change. So,
No.
So, Mayor, if I may, so what it sounds like we first need to address question 1 still, which was what you brought to the front here essentially is modifying and changing that definition a bit first, not code, not zoning code.
well, and that the fun part is I'll have to check to see, but even changing the definition may still trigger the public hearing requirement.
Mm-hmm.
So it's still, even though we're not making a substantive change, hey, we're adding a zoning classification or something like that, changing the definition may still qualify as a zoning code change to trigger the public hearing aspect, as well as the council public hearing and ordinance.
Okay. So the other option is again, the big question was, is there anything that needs to be done at this time? Yes.
And I think it sounds like there's
Yeah.
something we want to do. We're just not quite there as to what yet. Is it ask council to adopt a policy, or is it make a definition change? I mean, it sounds like we're definitely away from adding stuff to the zoning code. And it sounds like our debate right now is between definition change or just coming up with a list of policy objectives to ask council to adopt and evaluate.
Yeah, I personally think the definition change is needed. I don't think we want to add a separate category for short-term rentals. I don't think that's necessary at this time, but I do think we want to make a recommendation to council about a registration. And I don't think we want to do a permit, because then there's a liability issue of there being a permit, then someone's going to expect a certain inspection or whatever level that we're not ready to do.
Right.
Right.
And so
I do believe we recommend that, though.
yeah. So let me ask this though, and I gotta put my fiscal obligation hat down. I'm with you on not doing a permit with a licensure type situation, because as Terry and I were talking about residential building inspections this week, we don't have the personnel to do that, and we don't have the resources right now available to us to bring someone in to do that. So I'm with you on the licensing side. But what about on a registration side, so that we know they exist, so that we can make sure we collect, it's a business, so that we can make sure we collect
Income
the
tax.
appropriate income tax. We don't have a bed tax, so there's not going to be a bed tax there. But, if someone has, $100 of income off of it, the village income tax would be $1.
Right.
And if we don't know that those exist, we don't know to tell our tax commissioner to make sure those are paid.
Rick, are you still with us?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Through like Airbnb and VRBO, I'm not sure if you're still registered in any of those. Did they require you to have a vendor's license or any kind of commercial license to be
No.
involved with them?
No.
Okay. So I was thinking if they did, then you could go back and trace it back through there.
Yeah, but our income tax is a payroll tax. It's not a profit and loss tax.
It goes off of, it's an income tax. And so like when my company was an LLC before it became a corporation, that went through on a Schedule C for my personal income taxes.
Right.
But if someone's renting a room one weekend a month and getting in money, I mean, shoot, we've got rentals in the village that we don't know people are renting. So renting a room is one of those that could fly under the radar. And so do we want to have a registration so that if we find out someone's been renting a room every other weekend for a year and a half, when we look 2 years down the road, that we have an enforcement mechanism to say, you didn't register when you should have, and we didn't collect any income tax on what you did, so that we have that enforcement mechanism.
And Rick, I have another question for you. Now, like if you rent something through Airbnb, the way I understand it, the traveler would actually pay Airbnb than they pay you. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah.
Okay, so do you get a 1099 then from Airbnb?
No, I do not.
So do they give you any kind of record of what they paid you every year?
I'm fairly certain they probably report to the government. I don't know, but I'm certainly not going to take the chance of not reporting my revenue. So
Right.
whether someone else might or might not, I don't know, but I'm certainly not ever going to go on that.
You might not.
I'm surprised that
but
it wouldn't do it a 1099 or something.
I'm quite certain that Airbnb and VRBO report revenue to the government. I can't show you how and when personally, but I'm certain they do.
Do they take your social security number when you register with them?
I don't remember.
Because if they don't take your social security number, there's no way for them to report the revenue up, and they're a middleman. And in my line of work, I just figured out a great way to launder money.
I don't know the answer to that. I doubt they want my social security number, to be honest.
Well, so if Airbnb did not take your social security number, even if they report revenues to the IRS, there's no way to say this person renting was a renter or had a place for rent from us, and we paid them X number of dollars throughout the year. So there's no way that revenue gets reported to the IRS and attributed to any one individual. So it makes a perfect business situation for someone that wants to make a little bit of money on the side and not report it, to fly under the radar.
Fact that you're on the internet.
Except for the fact that you're on the, I mean,
you can hide a lot of places, but that's not one of them.
Yeah, no, I agree. But Mayor, I think this also goes to the point that you're trying to make, because we understand Rick is reputable, et cetera. But how about the people, and we know this is going on, that I have a house that are renting out just one room, sometimes months at a time. Not that person If
Right.
they're not registered, we don't know they have that income, and that would
And
not be
he's- and-
online.
So
And
those
he's
are the
not on
people
the
doing the
internet.
things you're talking about, not me.
There you
and
go.
not-
And
Right.
there are some
But-
of those in town.
Right.
And there are some of those
you know,
down.
I'm not accusing you, right? I'm using
I know
you as
you're
a-
not. I know you're not. I get that. I get
You have
that.
experience here.
But yeah,
But-
I get that. But I'm just saying that if you're in this particular category, you're probably not doing that.
And that may be, but what we got to try to come up with is something that encompasses, unless we want to make a subset of a subset, here are bed and breakfasts, and these are listed on Airbnb and VRBO, and these are not, and these have to register and those don't.
Right.
And
I don't know how you would have known they existed had those people not come forward when this topic came up.
No,
Well,
that was
the-
another
the-
one, Rick. This isn't anything to do with those people. We had this issue last year, in fact, before
Mhm.
bed and breakfast talk ever happened, because we were getting complaints. So no, it
about
was
about these people renting rooms
Mhm.
that weren't
Mhm.
listed on the internet. So it's in some ways a separate topic, but I
But
have no
it-
problem filling out a form to let you know I'm doing this, and I'm sure the Shoals don't either. But that doesn't fix the problem that you're describing.
It doesn't, but it gives us
Leverage.
some mechanisms, because if we know they're there, then we can make sure they're doing the income tax. And if they're not doing the income tax, there's a whole series of enforcement mechanisms there. But it's also possible for council to enact an ordinance that if you don't fill out that application, that piece of paper, it is a violation of our ordinances, and you can be brought into mayor's court and fined for it. So we have that enforcement mechanism there to not only for the people coming in to prohibit or to make them aware of it so that maybe they follow the rules, but for those that don't follow the rules, we have the enforcement mechanism.
So that's great. I'm a little worried about the Nancy Crow hosts, because pretty much all they do is host Nancy Crow guests. And so they're not listed on Airbnb or on any websites, but they do host guests on behalf of Nancy Crow. And so it would fall into that same category. So you might want to just at least make sure they're aware of this situation.
Okay.
May I
Thank you.
enter something here? This is Jim. You
Yeah.
were talking about the finances. Now, if all this money goes through Airbnb, part of that money, the bulk of that money, is passed through back to the owner of the rental unit. I can't believe that Airbnb is paying federal tax on all the money that comes in. So there's something, a 1099, there's something issued to tell the federal government, this is pass-through money to Rick, this is pass-through money to Jim, this is pass-through money to Brad. There's something has to be there, an audit trail, or they are responsible for the entire amount. Are they not? Think about that.
Well, I just did a quick Google search while you were looking that up. And on the Airbnb info page, where it says, should I expect to receive a tax form from Airbnb? And it says it's depending on your account status and other factors. You might, let's see. They require companies that process payments, including Airbnb, to report gross earnings for all U.S. earners who earn over $20,000 and have over 200 transactions per calendar year. Those would be issued on a 1099-K. So for someone that has less than $20,000 in pass-through earnings and less than 200 transactions per year, it does not look like that would get a form from the IRS or reported to the IRS. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say for the Airbnbs we know of, there's less than 200 transactions per year and less than $20,000 in gross earnings.
I will probably exceed the 20,000.
So you may get a 1099-K
Right.
from the IRS then.
Right. Likely I will, I may have already exceeded that, but it's irrelevant because I, as a business owner, I'm not sure how this impacts the village is.
Again, don't look at it personally as you as the business owner, because the problem here is the people we don't know about that won't follow the rules or will try to exploit them if we don't have them and cause a problem that's harder to fix than prevent.
I understand that. I don't know how the federal tax situation is relevant to the local community. It's really not.
Well, I think that was going more towards the, is there an application registration process so that we know you're here? Because our tax commissioner gets the information from the state, who gets it from the Fed. So if you get a 1099-K, we would know. But for that Airbnb rental doing $10,000 in income, we would never know from the tax filings. Now, it's $100 to the village, but that's still $100 to the village. And if we had 10 of them doing that, that's $1,000, and
But the revenue's not running through payroll, so it's not taxable to the village.
It goes through your personal income tax. The village income tax is based on that tax. So when my company was an LLC, so it was a Schedule C, so anybody, which goes for the same for sole proprietorships, that gets reported on your on your 1040, and that's what transfers
LLC
over.
and S corp.
Right.
Okay.
So for now, my company is an S corp, and so I fill out a tax form every year, but my company pays no tax.
Right.
But individually, I pay the tax on that.
Right. Right.
And it would be the same if your Airbnb were an S corp. It would show up on your individual income taxes, and that's how it would get taxed when you go through the RETA form.
Right. So, I mean, I don't do my taxes. Baltimore Tax does. So I'm sure if I owe it, he pays it. But yes, I get it. If you need to know they're there, you need to know they're there.
Right. And that gets us back to the application registration.
And going back to that registration, the Dublin information we had here, they're saying that they want an affidavit of compliance, and those who are involved in the B&B, short-term rental, whatever you want to define it as, they want to have them on record. They want to have basic information, to prove that basically they're standing up and doing the right thing. So they're getting ID information, and I didn't see it here, but I still think a fire inspection should happen. And if it were a hotel or motel, there'd have to be a fire inspection. So I think there should be a fire inspection annually, and if we're not going to charge a permit fee, I think that should be covered by the property owner. But I think those things are necessary.
Rick, I have a question.
This is Jim, would that fall under if we put together operating requirements? Like, it come up earlier in this meeting here that Dublin had a list of requirements for operation. Should that fall in there? These are the things you need if you're going to do this, and you get that sheet when you register?
Yeah, and I think that's, I'm sorry, Jimmy.
I think.
Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, I think that's something that we need to recommend that council consider putting together, whether it be an ordinance or whatever, to require registration, and then pass this information along so that the property owner knows what is required of them.
I think a little bit of a difference here between Dublin and Baltimore is that I think Dublin's was probably prompted by the memorial tournament, where you would go to houses where there are literally hundreds of people in the house celebrating the memorial tournament. And when you go to our Airbnbs, there's a family of 4 staying there for 2 weeks. So it's very little different than a typical rental property where there's just a family staying in the house. There's plenty of egress. But when you go to Dublin, it's almost like going to those college towns where you're comparing Baltimore to college towns, or Baltimore to the Memorial Tournament, where they rent out their 4,000 square foot house and a company rents it for a week, and there are literally hundreds of people in the house. So I think they were prompted to pass something because of a unique situation.
Well, and I have a hard time differentiating between why, and on one hand, I agree we should have a fire inspection because it's safety for everyone. But then the other attorney side of me says, how do we justify saying if you're a short-term rental and it's your residence, or a whole building, you have to have a fire inspection. But if you're a typical rental where you do 9 to 12 month leases, you don't have to have a fire inspection. What's the difference?
I personally think all of them should have a fire inspection. I guess I'm looking at it as a consumer. If I go to Timbuktu and get a Airbnb rented online, I would like to make sure that it is safe. So that's where I'm looking at. I'm looking at it as a consumer.
I'm not sure the fire department is going to get on board with that because they don't want to take the liability.
Well, and you might be right. I don't know.
Well,
in having spoken to them about this particular topic, they were told to stand down and they don't want to stand back up.
If
But
it's
maybe that's
considered
changed.
a business and it's a commercial inspection, they will do it.
Okay.
But that would fall into our commercial inspections that all the businesses in town must go through that we have in Fairfield County.
Well, that puts us back into the emergency lighting and egress and ADA and all those things again, which I'm not going to do that house. And I don't think other Airbnb people are going to do as well. So I'm not sure where you differentiate between the guy who rents a house for 3 years and the person who rents it for 2 weeks.
I wouldn't think
How do you
ADA.
differentiate that?
I wouldn't think ADA would apply to a short-term rental like that unless it is advertised as ADA compliant.
When you go commercial, you're back to ADA.
Well, now I don't have that because my occupancy is below whatever number that ADA was required. So there is a threshold.
I'd have to look into the specifics. Terry, you're muted.
Ken is correct. There is a threshold. Sorry.
Okay.
For ADA and compliance. Yes.
Okay, I don't know about emergency lighting. I'd have to talk to my architect about stuff like that. But yeah, I don't know how you differentiate the person staying for 2 weeks versus person staying for 2 years when it comes to that topic. But
Right.
Brandy here. So it goes back to the registration. So the ultimate goal is to basically, we also want to keep track of who is operating under this definition in town. So number one,
Right.
it sounds like we need to establish just for sake of knowing who is operating as such, just having them fill out a basic piece of paper, name, address, number of rooms. I mean,
And as we so often do, let me throw us a curveball on this. When we have them register or let us know they're there, do we want to limit, and this might be something, again, to make a recommendation to council, not necessarily in the zoning code, but do we want to limit it to only the owner of the parcel can operate the short-term rental? Here's my scenario. We have a home in the village that is, I think right now, named Felony Central, over by the schools, that I believe occasionally rents out a room short term, but the person living there is a renter, not the owner of the property. So what I don't want to see, or take the crime side out of it, there's a lot of properties around here available. And so someone buys a home and turns it into a rental for themselves and charges someone, $700 a month to rent this home. And that person who lives in Columbus says, well, I'm going to put it up for Airbnb because it's $35 a night. I can make more than $800 a month in a couple weeks and start raking in the cash because it's cheaper, and turn it around. So do we want to limit the person running a short-term rental to be the owner, or do we want to say, limit it to that so that a renter can't Airbnb rent what they're renting? Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
Yeah, that's funny. That's
Yes,
rental.
yes, it does.
That's Airbnb arbitrage. It's running rampant right now. It's like people rent apartments, they rent condos, they rent houses, and they re-rent them by the night. So it's huge on Airbnb, which you probably saw that when you started looking at it. Airbnb arbitrage, which is not what's going on here, but
No. But
in a sense it is, because the owner of my house is Baltimore Land Management, and Events at 501 is who runs the Airbnb part. So in a sense it is, but in a sense it's not. I'm the owner of both. So,
right.
But it's a slippery slope. I don't know.
And
Maybe we should go back to Upper Arlington's and just say no.
That'd be the easy way, wouldn't it?
That would be the easy way. They just said no, none here.
So, I mean, as we're talking about, keep that in mind, like Rick's situation where it's a business and then it leases it to another business to run. That's fairly common. And that I think has some built-in safety things there. We're not going to get someone creating shell companies to come in here and do Airbnb arbitrage type stuff. But it is possible for someone to rent a house and then rent out the rooms by the night. Just Joe Schmo from, the next village over. So, as we're talking about, policies to put forth and stuff and the application, when Brandy said here, here's who you are, the owner, we probably want to make sure you're the owner of the parcel or a member of the company that owns the parcel.
I personally think, honestly, what it gets down to enforcing a lot of the zoning codes. Just enforcement, which is, I know what we're short on, because a lot of these problems, they're not businesses such as 501 or even the home that's over on Railroad Street. These are private residences or residences that you think are private and people are renting or subleasing. And that's where the problem lies.
Right.
Mhm.
And Brandy, I think the important part of what you just said is it is a code enforcement issue, but the issue is that we don't have anything to enforce. So if we did have a policy and it was black and white, it's much easier to enforce a written policy than it is to get somebody to do something that's not written. It needs to be in black and white for us to be able to do the enforcement.
So the definition is going to be really important here.
Right.
Now, people keep
Definitely.
referring to council writing this policy. Are they the writers, or are we as the subcommittee the writers that is then of a policy that is then presented to council for adoption?
So if we're not changing the zoning code, what this committee can do is vote to send forth a recommendation to council to adopt an ordinance that implements this policy and enforcement mechanisms. But it's not something that would go into the zoning code. So yes, we can write one and send it to them. But then once it gets there, council can do with it as it will, amend it, change it, modify it. The flip side to a policy, whether it has enforcement mechanisms in it or not, for Terry to be able to do in code enforcement is that goes as an ordinance and 3 readings, but doesn't get the public hearings because we're not changing the zoning code. So just keep that in mind as well.
My concern is, if we tell them they can write the policy, they haven't done all the homework.
Well, and so we can. So yes, so I think if we want council to consider a policy for this, we should write it in this committee, have this committee approve it, and vote to send it to council, asking them to adopt it as an ordinance. So
I just wondered, because people kept saying we can have council, and I'm like, who on council is going to write this?
When we say we can have council, this committee should write the policy and vote on it to go to council for them to then adopt.
So we can come up
with both, so I nominate her.
What?
I said Brandy's on both, so I nominate her.
We won't do that to her.
Okay. So I guess I do have a question. I was, after reading all of that information, Dublin, Powell, Grandview, sorry, my animals here. Are there any smaller towns, zip codes that we can look up to see how they are handling this?
This is
I don't know,
Randy. Most of those smaller towns are looking at us.
Yeah, they're waiting on us.
James says, this is such a new, believe it or not, it's new. It's starting to come out to the suburbs, out of the big C's, like Columbus and Cleveland and et cetera, because they are putting stricter rules in, to Rick's point. So they're not having big party central. So now a lot of the little villages around that I reached out to are going, no, we don't have anything, but we want to see what you put together because we might use it. So that's the issue. We're kind of like the first on the block.
We're being proactive instead of reactive.
Yeah.
There you go. Okay, that's us, proactive.
A place that it seems like would radiate from would be Hocking Hills area. So there's nothing Logan, Lancaster, Amanda, Bloom. Really?
Yeah, I would think that in the Hocking
Nelsonville
Hills region, there's lots of small towns that are having.
Yeah, Nelsonville.
I
mean,
get
just
lots of friends that got shut out down there or got canceled or whatever happened. They stay here and travel to Hocking Hill because.
Yeah.
Well, I can do another search. I can admit
I'm just
go to Hocking Hill.
Well, here's the thing is most of those rentals in the Hocking Hills are not in incorporated municipalities.
No.
They're in townships which have limited zoning capabilities. So they're not in townships where we can pass laws and ordinances.
Agreed.
So Laurelville, Nelsonville, Sugar Grove.
Well,
I don't know any of those.
But again, Brandy, they might have a Sugar Grove address, but if they're not in the village of Sugar Grove, that ordinance wouldn't apply to them. So when you go down to Hocking Hills and everything has a Nelsonville address, but you're at Burr Oak, that's not within the village of Nelsonville. So whatever they would pass would not apply to that rental.
Yeah.
And it's quite frankly a kind of a boondoggle for them because there's no local income tax in townships either.
Right.
So when they're not in a municipality, there's no income tax and there's very limited zoning capabilities they have because of the way township law is different than municipality law.
Now, I had read through the Powell information, and theirs is actually rather restrictive, but there's a lot of really good information. And I think Powell was a little closer as far as to our community than like what Dublin is. But there's some good things here. I think there's more restrictions here than what we want to look into. But one of the things that they do have is a business license shall be required to obtain a municipality of Powell the permit before they issue a occupancy permit for use as a short-term rental. So they do have a lot of things in theirs as well.
Well, here's the suggestion I have, and this is just something I'm going to throw out. So you have all that information in front of you, and we've had a lot of discussion. What if everybody just emailed, say, the top 5 things that they would like to see, and then let's put them all together so we have a starting point.
Good idea.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
So if everybody would just put the top 5 things that they think should be incorporated in this
Expectations.
document.
The expectations that we have for short-term rentals in the Village of Baltimore.
And then email them all to me, and then we'll put them together in a document, and then we'll have something to look at, and say, yeah, I like this. No, I don't like this.
Okay, so that's the first line and first recommendation from Dublin's under their adopt a policy. That's where it says the city's expectations for the manner that short-term rentals will be operated. And then we can, people can suggest whether they think they should be registered or licensed or charged or not charged. And then we can compile that. Will give us a jumping off place.
We can do that. And if I could ask maybe if anybody has any thoughts on the bed and breakfast definition, whether you combine it from 2 different places or just take out the line about may serve breakfast or whatever. Let's add that as well, since we're still talking about definition of it as well, and then we can compile, maybe most of us come up with roughly the same, change. And then we can say, okay, well, here's what most people came up with for a change. And that way we can, have that definition ready, spend a little less time talking about it so we can talk about the priorities as well.
So why don't I put together a sheet that says kind of like a little survey, so to speak. So what would you define bed and breakfast as? What do you define short-term as? And what are your 5 top topics that you would like to see in sort of a licensing or a regulation platform? How's that sound?
If Rick Foreman doesn't want to make breakfast, I say we throw it out the window.
Okay.
I'm wondering, Terry, the easy way to do that might be, since everyone should have access to a website, we might be able to do a quick online form so that everybody can just type their stuff right into that, if that would work for everybody. And that way it would automatically put it right into a spreadsheet for us to look at and be able to easily distribute.
Okay, sounds good.
I thought what I would do is put that into a form and have Barb create it into a PDF so they can just type in it and send it back. I'm not sure what you're talking. Are you talking like a monkey survey?
That's what I wanted.
No, well, I was thinking more like a Google form.
Does Barb know how to do that?
I'm not sure anymore.
Everything.
I know I don't, but
Right,
I don't want to volunteer Barb for something she doesn't.
Why don't we do this? So Terry, Barb, and I will put our heads together, and you'll either get a PDF emailed or a link to a web form to type in your thoughts.
Thank you.
Okay.
Barb doesn't do web form.
Okay, Barb. Well,
Beautiful.
you know what?
She does fillable PDF forms that are great that I use for all my zoning now. So we'll come up with something and we'll get it sent out.
Yep.
I think that'll help us all focus on going forward.
Good plan.
So then what we would do then is, if we don't have anything else to discuss on that tonight, because that sounds like a good break point in this discussion, then for the February meeting, we would recap and be able to go over all that. And of course, by then, Barb will have the process in place, so everybody will get everything the week before, so everyone will have time to review it as well.
Correct, correct. So,
Okay, are we ready for new business, ducks?
well, wait a minute. So we'll get this. So I just want to leave you with this. So we'll get this all turned around and get it out to you by next week. And then you'll have to give us a couple of days to, turn it back as soon as you can. I'll put together a little timeline so that you can get it a week before the meeting. Does that make sense? So we have like basically 4 weeks to get all of this around.
Yep.
Okay, I'm done, Kay. Sorry.
All right, so we'll go ahead then and keep that on old business for our next meeting with that action plan. And with nothing else on old business, we'll move to new business.
Okay, I have your information as to when is possession for market ducks. So I guess you need to decide, are you going to disallow the requirement for chickens and ducks only for the market ones, because they don't have to be possessed until September 1st. And thus then they would be disposed of by the second week in October. So I can understand why we would not require them to pay a fee to own them for 6 weeks. But if you're going to raise ducks and have them all year round, and we have to deal with it, then I think you're going to have to charge them, 4-H or not. So there's the duck report.
Kind of like the chicken policy.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think our policy lacks, and of course, after dealing with our new zoning rules, I say new for about 5 years now on an everyday basis. I think one of the things that we do lack in our zoning under chicken policy that other municipalities do is to be very clear about the disposal of manure and the smells. Because if I get any complaints in the village, that is it. And then when I say your chickens are smelling, we need to do something, and they just go, well, we spread it in our garden, or we like it, or whatever. So I think eventually, and I don't think right now, because we have more than we can tackle right now with the short term, but I think we need to review that and make maybe a little tighter there.
Well, maybe we can include that as a subsection of ducks.
Ducks in.
Because it's along the same thing. It's going to be the same type of policy. It might even fall under the chicken policy. So we just add that in with ducks.
Keep all the fowl together, including the smells.
Yes.
Yep.
Right.
All right. Does anybody else have any new business?
I do real quick. And I'm going to be bringing this up, so I want everybody to think about it. Somehow when we did the new rules, under the development descriptions or specifications, we omitted a thing called coverage. In other words, what percentage of your lot can contain a structure or an accessory structure or a roof that gives off water, or sheds water. So somehow in our rules, it is non-existent except for our MU district, mixed use. We need to put that back into our rules and regulations. We have people that are starting to build bigger things that they're exceeding what we consider, well, they're trying to put a castle on a postage stamp. And since I don't have that proportion, a percentage that we should have there, it's hard to regulate it. Now, I reached out to Fairfield County Building because if you remember, Holly was the one that started our zoning for us, and James Mako is there now. And James and I had a meeting last Monday, and this is one of the things that we talked about, because if you would go to Pleasantville zoning, which, Baltimore does Pleasantville zoning, there is a percentage for each one of their areas that says you can have no more than 50% coverage on your lot.
I thought we
So I
talked
think
about
it's-
that, about the one property that's there next, they wanted to add a garage in addition to their barn and their house. And I thought that was our justification, that they should not build the garage was because of the coverage.
Well, and this is the thing, we're still working on that.
Oh,
And because now they want to put in another garage. So it's just growing. And so I think we need to, I brought home the old zoning rules and regs before, and I asked James's opinion, since this is his field. He said he believes that anybody that's in an R1, R2 should be 30%. Anybody that's in an R3 could be up to 50%, which doesn't make logic to me, because usually the R3s are smaller lots than the R1s and R2s.
Well, that actually makes sense, because the R3s are smaller. If you say only 30%, you end up with a single wide, an unbuildable lot, or a 12-foot wide modular trailer type size house on an R3. So that's why those numbers are reversed.
Okay.
So,
All right. So I'm going to put together a proposal to be on the agenda under new business next time about the percentage of coverage for lots when it comes to building things. Because I think we need to get that back into the zoning rules and regs. Like I said, if somebody was doing this in Pleasantville, I would have that document to do. The other thing that is not totally covered is frogs. And a frog is a finished room over a garage. So when does a garage with a frog become livable area? And nowhere in our zoning codes does it speak to that. So it's another thing that I will bring up. So you don't have to answer me. I just want to give you a heads up. For the next meeting, I will be sending out some things I would like to have addressed in our current zoning code. So just when you think we wouldn't have very many meetings this year, I think we'll have a lot, every one of them.
so we're dealing with frogs and ducks and chickens and
No,
Yep.
animal village. Huh.
all of which you can have for breakfast at your bed and breakfast.
Oh, very good.
But that's a good segue to my question for new business then is, years ago, the meeting started, I think, at 7:30, and then we moved them back to 7. And recently we've moved them to 6:30 so that we have time and it's not as late when we get done. Do we want to set the meetings? Does 6:30 work for everyone? And we can just say that our meetings, because we've got, everyone now should have the meeting information, the Zoom meeting information. It's the same meeting number and password for the rest of the year. And I think I even put on there 6:30 for the year, but do we want to set those and just say our meetings will be at 6:30 for the year? And I ask because we have to, if we do, we have to update our postings on the website and village notifications for it. And so if 6:30 works and we'd like to make that permanent for the year, we can do that. I just need to make sure everyone's okay with that.
I would go along with the majority, but quite honestly, I normally don't get out of the shop till after 6, so 7's better for me.
Yeah.
But I'm willing to adjust if I have to.
Kay, how about you?
I'm walking out of the after school program at 6 o'clock, and it's, I mean, my trains, I don't have to travel far, but it's really tough to, I've got to drop off a kid and then get home, and
Well,
I
maybe
burnt
we
my
should
lasagna in the oven tonight, and
Right.
So does 7 work for
7
better
works
for
better
everyone?
for me.
Fine.
7? All right. So we'll update them. We'll just say and I think that's already what we had for last year. I know we moved a couple of them back so that we could have some extra time, but we'll say 7. So our meeting in February will be February 11th at 7 p.m.
Perfect.
I guess
Okay.
I would rather have more meetings at 7, and we decide that we're not going to spend all night than have to have really long ones.
Right.
Fair enough.
Maybe
I
we
like
just
that
have a
plan too.
cutoff. After 2 hours, we're done.
Yeah.
Max.
Yeah.
Max. Okay.
Yep. Well, and to be fair, I think the way, now that, we saw where that discussion was going, and then Terry, you had the idea, let's regroup and gather some information offline and then come back and talk. We keep that in mind as we start doing discussions. We can move things along. So, okay.
Okay, sounds great.
Okay.
Quick question,
Terry, can I
Terry.
ask you a question?
Did we lose our percentage of coverage when regional planning redid our ordinances?
James said that he went back and looked at Holly's old files and he didn't see it there.
Okay.
But it is under the mixed use, and he said he doesn't understand why it would be under mixed use and no place else, but he couldn't find a document. So I guess it doesn't matter what happened to it. I say
Okay, we just need to bring it back. Okay.
Please.
I was just wondering where it disappeared to.
Mr. Mog.
Hey, Terry, when you're talking about lot coverage, you're talking about just structures or also impermeable surfaces as far as like rainwater runoff?
I think that's very good. I think it's both.
Okay.
So I put something together, thoughts and also examples. So again, we have something to talk to.
I would say, and check Terry, because I know, Ken, your lot there is almost all completely covered. I know there's a difference between the commercial lots
There
and
is.
uses versus residential.
Yes,
Right,
that is
right.
true.
Well, even my lot here on Ballsville, between the house and the barn, I've got a lot of coverage.
Yeah. I am more concerned with the buildings than I am well, I guess I shouldn't say that. I think we just put something down and we'll talk about it, but I think you're fine. I'm more concerned with putting a castle on a postage stamp.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right. If there's no other new business, again, our next meeting will be February 11th at 2021 at 7 p.m. And then is there a motion to adjourn?
I so
I'll make
move.
that.
I'll second that.
All right. So we'll give Kay and Ken the motion and Brandy the second. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? Hearing none, we will adjourn at 8:19. Thank you, everyone. I think it was a good meeting tonight, good discussion. And so Terry will get that stuff out, and I hope everyone has a good evening.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, see y'all.
Rick, thanks for being here, answering my questions.
Yes, I appreciate